the World Soccer Talk podcast, the only podcast that focuses on watching soccer on TV, online, and apps. In episode 136, we discuss LaLiga drops a bombshell by deciding to stay with beIN Sports for 4 more years. NBC goes overboard with their Christian Pulisic lovefest. K. Murray moonlights for a potential new broadcaster. We have the scoop on Steve Nash's future on BR football, plus letters from you, the listeners, in our Mailbag Section. My name is Christopher Harris, and I am joined by my co-host, Kartik Krishnaiyer. Kartik, it has started. The Premier League is back. We'll talk about that in a minute. It's strange for me. It's surreal for me. A lot of listeners who listen to this podcast pretty often know that during the season I'm traveling a lot, and it's traveling because of travel soccer. Last season I had 2 girls in a travel soccer program. This season it looks like it'll be 1, but every weekend kind of just driving around Florida, going to different games and things. It made me think, Kartik, about this because the season almost always kicks off at the same time of the Premier League and ends almost the same time as the Premier League. And it made me wonder, I'm thinking to myself, okay, well, why is Major League Soccer... Why is it aligned that way? And why is Major League Soccer aligned from, say, March until, it used to be September, but now it's October creeping into November? And it made me think, Kartik, correct me if I'm wrong, but originally it was because in the early days of Major League Soccer, a lot of the owners were NFL owners, and they were looking for ways to go ahead and have their team, have people paying tickets, buying tickets for the off season. And now I think we're at a point where a lot of MLS fans say, okay, yeah, we have to have a season that's March through September, October, and it's because of NFL.
Yeah, Chris, I this is such a bugaboo for me because when I make my arguments about calendar change, which I think is one of the fundamental problems with the sport in this country, that the professional leagues are running February or March through November, December on that calendar and running through the hottest months of the year at a time of great climate change, by the way. It's gotten hotter in most of the country during those months. I'm always told, well, this is the way it has to be in this country. We don't have to do things like Europe. We don't care when the Italian league or the English league or the German league plays. It has to be done this way in the U.S. But then I point out that as someone who's worked in the sport at the lower division level, youth soccer is our key component in terms of fan base, in terms of selling tickets to parents and to youth coaches and to kids. And they run on the same calendar as European football. Then I get all kinds of other myopic arguments. So it's also, to me, a marketing issue because maybe it's different at the MLS level because they sell so many more tickets than we did at the NASL or USL teams do, or what have you, the other lower division leagues. But youth soccer and youth soccer groups are an important, are a critical component in sales to sustain the professional game at the levels below MLS. And I believe, honestly, probably at the MLS level with a lot of clubs also. So it makes no sense to me, and we'll have another conversation about this, I'm sure, soon. We need to move on to other things, but youth soccer runs on the same calendar as European football in this country, which everyone seems to forget who are MLS fans who don't really follow the sport from top to bottom.
So we ended last week's podcast by talking a little bit about the transfer deadline window because the transfer deadline show was on at the same time that we were recording the podcast. It was live on NBCSN, which was also live on Sky Sports, and so there was the synergy between the two there that probably some of us saw, and we talked about a little bit that we had seen that morning. And then we had the first game of the season on Friday, the Liverpool-Norwich game. And we got a chance to see kind of some of the differences that NBCSN has implemented so far with the Premier League coverage. Different graphics. So the graphics that they're using now are definitely inherited from Sky Sports. It's kind of a blend between the two. It's not perfect. But there's elements of it which are more readable. Even like the team lineups, to me, I prefer that, where you can actually see it visually much better than what NBCSN had before, which was kind of a pitch, and they it was harder to actually see the names on screen. And then pre-match interview on Friday with Gary Neville and Kelly Cates, kind of talking about Sky Sports' coverage and about the Premier League and how excited they were. And it started off well. But so the weekend for me was a blur, Kartik, because of travel soccer. I did get to see games here and there, but not as much coverage as you did. And then Sunday, I had a travel game, and then I came back right at kickoff for Man United against Chelsea and watched that. What's your take on what you've seen so far from NBCSN from the opening weekend, and was there anything that stood out for you?
Yeah, it seemed like their entire coverage starting Friday was gearing towards Sunday and Pulisic, which was, I think, very Fox-like in the sense that they're playing on the American. And quite honestly, Fox has never been this overt with it. Now, you can argue that Pulisic is a £75 million player, and he's a stalwart on the national team, but there have been lots of Americans in the Premier League during NBC's term covering the league. Jeff Cameron started virtually every match for Stoke their last few seasons in the league, right before they got relegated. Tim Ream was at Fulham last year. Obviously, Tim Howard, who would join Arlo White at times, or Steve Bauer in the commentary booth, was in the league. Brad Guzan was in the league, so on and so forth. And Fox has had Pulisic and a number of other Americans, right? There were nine different Americans who scored goals in the Bundesliga last season. I've never quite seen anything like this, Chris. I mean, it was the whole weekend. Now, they would get away from it at times. I mean, I thought it was really cool having Susan Sarandon, who's, of course, Kyle Martino's mother-in-law, on set right before the Spurs-Villa match. I'm really looking forward to seeing all of these newly promoted teams, and as someone who watches the championship pretty avidly, and I do appreciate that NBC showed us Sheffield United on Saturday, and I enjoyed that match. But it seemed like everything was gearing towards Chelsea and Pulisic to the point where Sunday was insufferable, right? Yep. That all the conversation was about Pulisic. When he didn't start the match, they superimposed a graphic, which I've never seen before for any other American player or player period, on the screen during both the Leicester-Wolves match on CNBC and the Newcastle-Arsenal match on NBCSN. Then they go to the studio, and this is all really Rebecca Lowe and the guests want to talk about. Then they throw it to Arlo White, and he's talking about Pulisic. It was quite bizarre, and this is taken away from their analysis about other players. So, I also had a bad experience because, again, I watched the championship a lot. I was really excited Mason Mount was starting. Mm-hmm. He was one of the, to me, funnest players to watch in that division. I think you agree with me, last season when he was with Derby. I didn't even think that he was starting at Pulisic's expense when I tweeted it. And I got so much, so much just nasty and anger that it eventually drove me off Twitter for a couple of days. But there seemed to be, in NBC's analysis, less emphasis on Pogba, Maguire, Wan-Bissaka, the new signings for Manchester United. How is Mount and Abraham going to integrate into this Chelsea team? Obviously, also Ross Barkley looks healthier and fitter than he has in several years, going back to his time at Everton. All of that was overshadowed by discussion of Pulisic, and it was overbearing and suffocating. Same thing at halftime. Should Pulisic come on? After the game, the first 3 or 4 minutes was spent on Pulisic. And I appreciate NBC, and you'll get into it in ratings in a few minutes. They had a huge bump for this match. Maybe it was because it was Manchester United and Chelsea, and it was to start the season. It may not have been because of Pulisic. I have to contrast this with ESPN FC, who that same day, Dan Thomas's show spent, I believe it was 12 minutes and 44 seconds on the match, breaking it down. They didn't mention Pulisic once. Now, you could argue that they're catering ESPN FC because they're on Plus now and they're not on regular ESPN or ESPN2 anymore, that they're catering to a very niche European football fan, right? European-oriented football fan in the United States who are more interested in hearing about what Pogba did and Rashford did and what maybe Abraham didn't do and Chelsea didn't do than hearing, and Conte being hurt, all that stuff, than hearing about Pulisic. But the contrast to me was pretty striking.
Yeah, this is probably the first time I've been really disappointed with NBC Sports overall for their coverage, because they started in 2013 roughly, so it's been a good 6 years of coverage that every year seems to be getting better and more fine-tuned, and the analysis has been spot on, and some good observations, etc., etc. I think it's a little bit too early to say they've jumped the shark, but if they continue this was the shark that they jumped, because it's one of those things. Because even in the match itself, this one match, he had a poor match. I mean, it was his giveaway that led to I think it was the second goal for Man United. And he did not have a good match. Now, the Uefa Super Cup is a different story. He definitely came to light and was much, much stronger and better in that. But
Chris, this was the issue at Dortmund, too. He would have a good match where he would be spectacular in a stretched match where he wasn't having to do much defending or make quick decisions on the ball. Then the next match for Dortmund, he would give the ball away. It would result in a goal, and Dortmund had a lot of wide options. Unlike Chelsea, they weren't under a transfer ban, so they could sit him in the next match. So let's keep in mind, and I think this was never mentioned on NBC the whole weekend, he didn't start regularly for Dortmund last year. In fact, there were large periods of the season where he was an unused sub for several matches in a row while they were pushing for the Bundesliga title.
And that's the thing with NBCSN. I mean, they have to cover it. They have to talk about him in terms of it's one of the big stories coming into the season. But in last week's podcast, we interviewed Pierre Musa, who's the executive producer, the lead producer for the NBCSN coverage of the Premier League. And I asked him, I said, how will you cover Pulisic? And I think it was one of those things where he said roughly, we're going to take it step by step. Yes, we're definitely going to talk about him, but we're not going to go overboard. Well, they went overboard. So I don't know if it's one of those things where it's a split between, say, the marketing, advertising side of NBCSN and then the editorial, kind of the production side, where they say, hey, we just want to keep it simple. We want to talk about it. We'll mention him, but we're not going to go overboard and go into a lot of detail. And it seems to be that the marketing, advertising side won, because even in the ads, I think at halftime or after the game, they're talking about the next game on NBCSN with Chelsea Leicester, I think. But it was okay. Christian Pulisic's first home game. It wasn't talking about Chelsea and Leicester and all the wonderful things about those clubs. It was one individual.
Chris, it was a promo for the weekend, for the next weekend, which includes Spurs and Manchester City.
Yeah.
An epic top 4 clash. But they were talking about Pulisic, and that was the thing that bothered me the whole weekend. Opening weekend of the Premier League season was Christian Pulisic and Chelsea. Again, that was the highlight match of the weekend. You don't get fixtures generally like Man United Chelsea the first weekend of the season, but they made it strictly about Pulisic, it seemed, and everything else was secondary.
The other thing too, at the post-match after the Man United-Chelsea game, I mean, just seconds later, once they go to the studio, and it's Rebecca Lowe, Carl Martino, and I forgot who else was in the studio, but anyway, it felt as if like someone had died. It was so flat, so downbeat. You could tell from the way that Rebecca Lowe and Carl Martino were talking that they were really disappointed. It was kind of a downer. It was a big downer, and it should have been a huge up. I mean, this is Man United, who has delivered some of the biggest TV ratings for NBCSN, historically speaking. Whenever Man United are doing well, NBCSN ratings usually go up. And this is an incredible match by Man United. Chelsea, yes, individual mistakes leading to a resounding defeat, but this is something you should be excited about. This is a result that probably very, very few people expected. You had Daniel James starring in his first Premier League match. This was a good feel-good atmosphere. Yes, if you're a Chelsea supporter, that's what it felt like. Is that Rebecca Lowe, which we know that she's not a Chelsea supporter, and Kyle were like as if they were really upset. But the reality is that they were downbeat because I think their expectations of what this could have been, what this may have been if Pulisic had scored a goal, how this would have helped NBC's ratings, how this would have helped probably Rebecca Lowe and Carl Martino on a personal level in terms of raising their level as talent and maybe going on to bigger and better things. Who knows? But the reality is, as a viewer, I was like, come on, this is nuts. This is crazy. This is the first game of a very long season. Yes, everyone, I think, wants to see Christian do really well. Everyone wants to see him be a good representation of the United States, a great story. We want to see him succeed. We want him to go on to great things with the US men's national team. But the Premier League is not about one individual. It's not about one American. It's about we watch this because of the clubs, whether it's the clubs we support or the clubs we hate, or it's club focused. It's not focused on one individual.
Yeah, and we've criticized Fox through the years, Chris, but when I think back at Fox's coverage of the Premier League and of Europa League and other things, I think about the great moments from Clint Dempsey. He scores the winning goal at Old Trafford for Spurs when they beat Manchester United at Old Trafford for the first time since the 1960s, I believe. He scores the goal against Juventus, right, in the Europa League. Maybe the most important goal in Fulham's history. Yep. Certainly one of the most celebrated. And it wasn't even after the events, it wasn't quite like this. As jingoistic as we've accused Fox of being, as USA, rah, rah, as we've accused them of being, I don't remember them and last season when Bayern played Borussia Dortmund the first time, I was pretty critical of the fact that they spent a lot of time in the studio before the match talking about Pulisic. And then, if I recall correctly, he didn't even start, right? Jadon Sancho started on one wing and Guerrero on the other. Pulisic came off the bench, and they won. That was the match Dortmund won earlier in the season. But they didn't spend nearly the amount of time, even in a kind of USA-geared coverage of a league that, we're going to get to this in a little bit, obviously, in the show, that they don't actively promote. They didn't do anything remotely resembling what NBC did this weekend. It was really alarming, and I don't know if they're taking. I initially thought, oh my gosh, they see that Fox has done this and Fox has been able to drive ratings on Women's World Cup or what have you, where there's successful U.S. component, Copa America in 2016. They're taking a page out of Fox's playbook. I realize, Chris, it might be more out of Sky's playbook. The synergies with Sky, we're talking a lot about. We saw it on display this weekend, even with the graphics and the studio, and a lot of it was positive. I will concede that. But I think Sky has always had a very sensational streak to the way they cover the Premier League and bumper programs, and they've had certainly a nativist streak to the point where, and I can see it. I don't watch all of Sky's coverage, and I base this on hearing and reading from other sources. But if you listen to the Guardian podcast, going back to the James Richardson days, now Max Rushton, they're always mocking Sky's coverage and like their Englishness, right? Mm-hmm. Their Britishness in what is an incredibly cosmopolitan league. I never put too much stock into that. I'm just like, well, because it doesn't really affect me, and I don't think about it. But I kind of saw that on display this week with NBC, maybe cohabitating with Sky. They're feeling this is the way forward. You have an American player who's worth $75 million on the transfer market for whatever reason. Maybe a lot of that was marketing, more than football. But milk it. And unfortunately, it's. You said jumping the shark, and you can only jump the shark once, right? They may have done it. Let's see how this plays out in the next couple of weeks. Unfortunately, I think maybe that UEFA Super Cup performance from Pulisic, where he was good, very good in the first half. Although, again, I mean, I like Mason Mount, and I thought Mount was maybe even better. They're both good. They both played well when Mount came on for Pulisic. Might just encourage them to go further and deeper down this path. Yeah, to amp it up. I mean, he got the assist in that game and had a goal, but it was disallowed for offside. Really close decision there. But if this had been Rob Stone and Alexi Lalas on this past Sunday on NBCSN talking about even the love fest of Christian Pulisic, they would have gotten skewered. I mean, social media would have gone absolutely nuts. But with it being Rebecca Lowe and Kyle Martino, I think there's a little bit more patience there, a little bit more respect. But effectively, they were saying the same things that Rob Stone or Alexi Lalas would have said. But the accents are different. I mean, Kyle's, of course, American. But so, yeah, we'll have to wait and see what happens with that. But the other thing, so I didn't watch as much coverage over the weekend, but I did get
a sense that the coverage has changed slightly, and again, it's the first weekend, so maybe they'll go back to the norm from this weekend onwards. But it did seem to be more playful, and like, for example, there was a scene. I can't remember if this was Friday or Saturday. Maybe it was Friday, but there was, or maybe it was even Thursday. But there was Carl Martino had these ribbons, and he was prancing around the pitch, and Lee Dixon and Arlo White were pretending to be kind of bemused, and I don't know if you saw that, but it was very much more of a playful manner over the weekend. And the other thing too, on Sunday mornings, so on the Sunday mornings now, which is a big deal, is now that the 11 o'clock kickoffs on Sunday for the Premier League Eastern Time now have been moved to 11:30 Eastern Time. So NBCSN, starting on Sundays, starting this past Sunday and every Sunday moving forward, now have a pre-game show that's 2 hours. So they have a lot more time. So I was expecting Sunday morning to be almost like Sunday supplement on Sky Sports, where they would try something different and maybe bring a couple of journalists in, ask them questions, go more for a deeper dive analysis. And really what it turned into is more of a recap show. So for anyone who missed Friday's game or Saturday's games, Sunday morning was kind of almost like a match of the day, kind of the NBCSN version of it, just kind of saying, okay, here's all the goals that happened, here's what you missed, catching up on this and looking ahead to the games ahead. And to me, I think they're underutilizing the opportunity that they have there. Again, that could change over time, but I was disappointed with that.
Yeah, so in fairness, I was disappointed in it too. In fairness, Rebecca Lowe did say in promoting it that the 2 hour, now 7 a.m. Eastern time, start time for Premier League Sundays gives them an opportunity to review all of Saturday's action. So my expectation was kind of that they would do that, but I also thought with the increased time block, there would be some sort of other element to it. Maybe they'll work on that as the season rolls on, particularly once Europa League starts. Well, it starts now. Wolves are going to have to play on Sundays, obviously. That maybe they'll tweak that a little bit. But yeah, I was disappointed by that. But in fairness, they did give full disclosure about what the expanded hour of Premier League Sundays was about.
And maybe that's what it is really. It's maybe more of a replacement for the match of the day kind of. Well, they have the goals. What was it called? Goals Fest or whatever it's called. The summary game that happens usually Sunday afternoon or Saturday afternoon after the games. Goal Zone, and then they have Match of the Day. This is essentially what Match of the Day is. It's kind of just a recap.
Yeah, and so Match of the Day on Sunday was interesting, Chris, because they spent 15 minutes, 20 minutes recapping the highlights of United Chelsea, and they showed the pitch side interview with Daniel James, but then they quickly went through the Arsenal Newcastle match and Leicester Wolves, and then spent 15 minutes showing highlights again from Saturday, which and those were quicker. They didn't go through kind of the full Match of the Day experience for how they cut those highlights, but so they did that on what is the Match of the Day too, right? Essentially the Sunday show. Yep. So I don't know. Maybe they're just they're tweaking this, or they're experimenting with seeing what works best to get Saturday highlights on Sunday again.
Yeah, maybe we'll have to wait and see what happens. So on the UEFA Super Cup, I had the game on in the background. I watched most of it, but at the same time, I was on the phone doing some interviews and some reporting on the news that we'll talk about in a little bit about beIN Sports. But and also I missed the Campeones Cup game too, which I heard was really good. Again, travel soccer getting in the way. I ended up being at a practice last night. What was your take on those two games?
Yeah, so I Campeones Cup, I really thought ESPN did a great job of wraparound coverage, utilizing all of their resources in terms of American soccer and American soccer knowledge, and also their knowledge of Liga MX. Same thing with 2DN. On the UEFA Super Cup, and by the way, the Campeones Cup match, unlike last season, was very, very good, very thoroughly enjoyable to watch.
Plus Kay Murray making the
making her debut. Yeah.
So and it looks like she's moonlighting too. So same thing with Kevin Egan, previously with beIN Sports, doing some work for TNT during the summer, during those Liverpool games, kind of as a host. Kay Murray kind of basically auditioning in many ways live on camera for the Campeones Cup. So maybe, hopefully, fingers crossed, she'll get a permanent position there at ESPN.
Yeah, and then with the UEFA Super Cup, they had gone to a new format, or not a new format, but Steve Nash, you'll talk a little bit more about this in the next segment. Steve Nash not on set. I thought the pre-match show, they did talk about Pulisic, but not any way in the manner NBC did. There was heavier analysis in that studio, even with the same team. Maurice Adu makes some very good points, even though I don't know if his camera presence is quite there yet. But in terms of his analysis, he's gotten a lot better. I liked some of the points from Carlos Bocanegra also, particularly about Alisson and Adrian being a defender who played in the Premier League for a number of seasons. He and in Europe, played in France and played in Scotland as well. Kind of understood that. In addition, I liked what they did at halftime. So at halftime, they already note that Ox is coming off for Firmino. Steve Nash goes to the tactics board before they go back to the pitch. Not Steve Nash, sorry, Stu Holden. Mm-hmm. Goes to the tactics board and goes through how that will change the way Liverpool plays. Lo and behold, the first 5 minutes of the second half, what he talked about right before they went back, I'm talking about probably 12 minutes into halftime, once they got word of the substitution, is how Liverpool changes. So there was a lot of clunkiness with TNT's coverage last season. I think there's still some of that clunkiness just in presentation. We just have to live with it. But the actual level of analysis around this match, I thought was quite good. Now, again, they had one match, right? One match to focus on. They blew it with the Champions League final. They hit a home run with it in the Super Cup. The question is when we get to the match days where they're showing one match on TNT, the rest of the matches are on Bleacher Report. They have to get through things. Will they show proper highlights? Will they analyze properly? That was a downfall last season. But my assessment of yesterday's coverage might be different than other people who are predisposed not to like TNT. I was quite happy with it.
Yeah, it is interesting how there are a lot of people who are predisposed to hating anything that TNT does with soccer coverage. I mean, and part of it too is just first impressions. It's one of those things that people see and then they don't like it, or it's different, or they don't like the way they're dressed, or they just don't like the individuals, and then that's their permanent evaluation of who they are and what they do, and that sticks. But with Stu Holden, I don't know if maybe Firmino was warming up like towards the end of the first half, or there was somebody on the sideline that said like, hey, I heard that Firmino's coming on. If not, in terms of if it was just a tactical, which was Stu Holden's very tactical. I mean, that's his mindset, and he's great at communicating it and explaining it and talking it through. So I wouldn't be surprised if he looked at the way that the team was playing, which in the first half it was pretty obvious that Chelsea had more of the ball and they were missing Firmino in terms of Liverpool, in terms of being able to link up and create more up front. It changed the game, and he was spot on and had great analysis, so I'll give him full credit, and it was great insight, and let's see more of that. And you're right, Kartik, the challenge is when you have 2 or 3 games or 2 games happening at once, how do you focus that time effectively where you're not all over the place, and with a lot of talking points, a lot of things happening. That's the key. But just as same as last season though, Kartik, too. I think with the UEFA Super Cup 2, I think they did really well. I guess we'll have to wait and see. All right, Kartik.
Kate Abdo, by the way, really came through too. I give her credit. I've been critical of her performance as a presenter last season, but maybe you're right. Maybe because I was abroad and missed the UEFA Super Cup coverage last season, which was Atleti and Real Madrid, right? Mm-hmm. Would have been the Super Cup. So I missed that. Maybe you're right. Maybe they came through last season and then just backslid after that. But it seemed like a whole new level from them in this show, at least for me, compared to especially the disastrous conclusion of the year with the Champions League final.
Yep, let's hope they keep it up. All right, Kartik. going over to you for the TV streaming news. And when I heard this news, I almost fainted, but I'll have you tell it.
Yeah, as you mentioned, it was breaking during the Super Cup yesterday, and I got a tip about it and didn't know. I just was stunned. La Liga has extended its U.S. TV rights deal with beIN Sports through 2024. So this cycle ends this season, and then they'll have it for an additional 4 seasons after this season. So 5 more years on beIN.
Yeah, so the article, so World Soccer Talk got the scoop on this one, the exclusive. So it goes into a lot more detail about what happened and the why and analyzing it. So if you haven't checked it out yet, it's on the homepage of worldsoccertalk.com. Highly recommend you check that out. At the end of the day, Kartik, I think it's one of those things. I mean, you and I were surprised by this because everything that we had been hearing, everyone that we had been talking to, everyone was saying that just La Liga's really, really disappointed with the way things are working out because they have high expectations. They have grand visions of making La Liga as big, actually bigger than the Premier League. That's the mindset that they're coming from. They see the league, they see the quality, the technical level, the money that's been spending. They're looking at the production point of view. They're doing a lot of things right, and the challenge that they've had in the US has been distribution, and beIN Sports getting knocked off Xfinity, Comcast, and also DirecTV is a huge blow. So all thoughts and all signs were that the beIN Sports, this would be the final year of La Liga contract, but at the end of the day, money talks. And sometimes it can create some strange bedfellows. And here we have a deal that happens that's really more of a global deal. This is something that is not US specific. This is more of a global deal. And this is beIN Sports sitting down with La Liga saying, okay, hey, how can we work together and continue this relationship on a global level? And here's what we can offer you, and vice versa. So on a global level, the synergy makes a lot of sense. The other thing with this Kartik, and we have to talk about it, is that this very well could be a move by beIN Sports, which are, owned and based in Qatar, to go ahead and put the World Cup coverage for Qatar in 2022. In a positive limelight, getting a lot of kind of marketing and promotions and building up. The timing for this is perfect in terms of La Liga being one of the most watched leagues in the world, and whether it's Ronaldo, not Ronaldo anymore, Messi and all the other stars, this gives them a great platform. And I think this is to me one of the main reasons why. Who knows how much money has been offered? That they're accepting, but we don't know that yet. At some point, we'll probably know. But how big of a deal this is, and how much the Qatar 2022 World Cup will play into this. The other thing, Kartik, about this too is that according to one of my sources, I've been told that this TV rights deal never came to market, which means it was a private sale and it never went into a bidding process. So this would have been something, if the report is true from one of my sources, this would have been something where it had been a private negotiation, discussions and negotiations. It would have probably been beIN Sports coming to La Liga and saying, hey, we're willing to offer you, this amount of money, and maybe even more if you kind of keep it within the beIN Sports family. And beIN Sports is a major player worldwide. In the US, they get a bad rap for not having great distribution, but globally they're a huge player in the Middle East, in Africa, just around the world. beIN Sports is a major player. So this is something that I think that's the private sale, the private deal that was done is something that they're thinking globally, and this makes sense for many ways. And it'll be interesting to see what that final number is in terms of what beIN Sports was willing to pay for global rights to, I think about 17 territories to pay to La Liga for the rights to broadcast these games. Yeah,
I think it's probably, again, wrapped into the global deal, which is why I was a little bit surprised, and we still don't have confirmation on this, but surprised that the Bundesliga I guess they were so concerned about the U.S. market. They have a global deal with Fox. I thought maybe they were going to renegotiate that, and maybe the U.S. would be lumped into that again. That they apparently, and we again don't know this, have broken it off. I think it's a problem for La Liga's exposure in the United States, though, because you've got Liga MX on, which now will have the increased profile of 2DN. And that launch, which happened over the summer. You have the Premier League, obviously, well set on NBC. I think Serie A and the Bundesliga, whether the Bundesliga remains on Fox or moves to ESPN Plus, there will still be more exposure and greater access to it, or at least more promotion of it than you can possibly get with beIN, unless beIN can get back on some of the satellite and cable systems. I look at Serie A in particular. I think what ESPN has done for Serie A in elevating it just in a year, and that'll continue during the term of this deal that they struck with IMG for the rights, I think puts La Liga in a difficult position. They have the two most popular club teams in this country outside of Mexican clubs, in my opinion. They're in Real Madrid and Barcelona. You could argue Liverpool's in that conversation, Chelsea's in that conversation, but probably the two most popular clubs. Yet they're going to get far less exposure for those clubs when they're not in Champions League on TNT than you get for just about any other big club, European club in the United States, with the exception of PSG. So that's got to be a concern, and I think it might have been good for the rest of the league, but I'm not sure it's necessarily good for Real Madrid and Barcelona's brand in the United States.
Well, that's where it comes to, is that according to a couple of my sources, is that discussions are being had between La Liga and beIN Sports about the opportunity to go ahead and sub-license a couple of those games a weekend to other broadcasters in the United States. So, for example, hypothetically, and this probably would not be El Clasico, but hypothetically, maybe it's Real Betis against Valencia on a Sunday, and it's a Sunday morning, and it's okay. Is that a game that maybe ESPN or ESPN Deportes might be interested in broadcasting as part of a sub-licensing deal? Maybe they have a window every Sunday morning, whatever time it might be, let's say 10:30 Eastern time, and showcasing a La Liga game at that time, and maybe once in a while it'd be a Real Madrid game, but most of those Real Madrid games and Barcelona games would be on beIN Sports. Same again too. Maybe there's another partnership too, where maybe it's with Univision, and Univision says, okay, hey, we want just one game a week, and we're willing to pay X amount and showcase that. Maybe it's the Friday game, or whatever game it may be. So that does give an opportunity then to. It's a win for La Liga in terms of getting into more households and increasing the distribution. It could be a win for beIN Sports too, in terms of making more people aware of beIN Sports, and that if you want to watch all of La Liga, beIN Sports is the place to go. So that's a possibility. But at the end of the day, Kartik, La Liga, it was in a difficult position because, if you did go with one broadcaster, there aren't a lot of choices available. It's not like in Europe where you could start up your own channel and just have La Liga TV and broadcast over television. In order to get into the cable market or into the cable through cable companies and through satellite companies, we've seen this from beIN Sports. It's very difficult to start up a network and get into as many homes as possible, and it's very political in terms of the way the system is set up. Yeah,
this reminds me a little bit of the Bundesliga's reluctance to leave Gold TV. If you remember, the U.S. they were on Gold TV a full 3 years after the other leagues had split and gone to beIN, Serie A and La Liga. Serie A had been on Fox at that point, but had been on Gold TV earlier. But 3 years after beIN started, and then even after the contract went to Fox in this country, Gold TV retained some bumper rights, if you remember, and some rights to show replays because Bundesliga felt so indebted to them for carrying the product in the country. And quite honestly, Gold TV had done a good job in presenting the Bundesliga with bumper programs and the sort of stuff that we complain Fox doesn't do often enough. So it reminds me of that because there is no question the coverage of La Liga on beIN is top drawer. It's as good. It's probably, people get angry when I say this, it's probably as good as NBC is with the Premier League in terms of the way they present the league, the deep dive analysis they give, the wraparound. But again, the distribution is very difficult to get a handle on. So unless they go forward with some degree of sub-licensing and we saw, remember, Gold TV sub-licensed La Liga matches to ESPN during their final contract with La Liga, and it would never be El Clasico, but there were enough Real Madrid or Barcelona matches or Atleti matches to kind of make you feel like, okay, you had access to these teams via ESPN2 in those days. They would show those matches on ESPN2. Maybe that's the solution, because I think La Liga, obviously they have Relevant Sports advising them now. I think they have to come up with some sort of solution to this. Even speaking of Relevant Sports, even at that match I was at last week, Napoli and Barcelona, the big thrust, when you talked about, you saw the field boards watching on television. I was at the match. The big thrust was for ESPN's Serie A coverage, and the conversations I was having in the press box were, and I think I mentioned this last week, how visible ESPN was in promoting Serie A, and how much more accessible and prominent Serie A was becoming as a league Americans wanted to watch. Obviously, there's the added bonus of Ronaldo, and then some players that maybe Premier League fans are familiar with: Aaron Ramsey, Romelu Lukaku, those sorts of players moving, and managers, Sarri and Conte, moving to Serie A. But how much more prominent Serie A was becoming in the American, the European fan in the U.S. soccer psyche, because of the move to ESPN. So this is something La Liga really has to think about.
Yeah, we're in that in-between phase, though, because, Serie A is a great league. It's got, a higher caliber of players now, with, a lot of players being attracted to Serie A more so than in some previous years. But the reality is, even though they have the one game a week on ESPN or ESPN2, or most of the games actually on ESPN News, is the TV ratings for those games. I think most of the games are less than 100,000. I think a few were over 100,000, but barely. So even though it's on ESPN Plus, which nobody has those numbers in terms of how many people are actually watching that, we know how many subscribers there are, over 2 million, but most of that are probably people that have no interest in soccer at all. So I think in many ways, I think La Liga is in that in-between phase where they're like, okay, we have to stay on linear television. That's the biggest market that we can reach that way. And even with beIN Sports and beIN Sports en Español, even with all the distribution problems, and not on DirecTV, not on Comcast, those viewing numbers are still bigger than Serie A on ESPN News or ESPN2. So I think in many ways it's an in-between phase. They have to figure out a way in the United States to increase that distribution, and then the sub-licensing will help. Hopefully beIN Sports will get back on DirecTV. If DirecTV doesn't bring them back on this one, they're never going to do it, because if you have La Liga for the next 5 years, that's where people are going to be going to, and if DirecTV doesn't have it, they'll go to Dish. Comcast is a different story, just because of the whole FCC kind of appeals and complaints and everything that between Comcast and beIN Sports. I don't see that happening. But DirecTV, they have to, right? They have to wise up and say, hey, well, okay, yes, we have some disagreements, but we need to do business with these guys, because that's the only main place that you can see all of the La Liga. At the end of the day, this is a huge lifeline for beIN Sports. There have been discussions or kind of scuttlebutt that perhaps beIN Sports' future in the US was on shaky ground. This gives them a huge lifeline. If they had lost La Liga rights to somebody else, that could have been the end of beIN Sports in the US. And Kartik, it's I guess the last point I have about this is that yet again, DAZN gets shut out for soccer rights in the US, and this was their last chance to get some big soccer rights for a while. Of course, maybe there's a sub-licensing deal in place, but we thought that DAZN was going to be a major player in soccer, and it looks like they lost the deal for the Bundesliga, and now it looks like they've lost the deal for La Liga, and right now I think all they have is the J-League, and that's it. So I'm sure they're just going to focus on boxing and MMA and kind of those types of sports now. All right, Kartik, speaking of beIN Sports, some other news this week. This one flew under the radar, but Hope Solo is going to be co-hosting a new show. She has joined on beIN Sports. It's called Weekend Winners, alongside Jeremy St. Louis. The weekly show will premiere on Monday, August 19th at 7 p.m. Eastern on beIN Sports. The cast will wrap up the weekend with a comprehensive review of which teams and players came out on top in the world of soccer, and which will be faced with a hard case of the Monday Blues. In addition to the show Weekend Winners, Hope Solo will also help kick off the weekend's coverage, starting this weekend, of La Liga, with appearances on multiple beIN Sports shows, including the Soccer Extra and the Express on August 16th, 17th, and 18th. And then Kartik, in related news.
Yeah, as a follow-up to our recent story we've discussed on this podcast, the court in Spain has ruled that matches in La Liga can go ahead on Friday, so there'll be a match tomorrow. We're recording this on Thursday, Barcelona and Bilbao. But Monday games will not be allowed. That means two of the games originally scheduled for this Monday have been moved to Saturday or Sunday. Both the Bundesliga and La Liga seasons start on Friday. I want to point this out. This is another little piece of analysis from the first news topic. Tomorrow we have a championship match at 2:45 Eastern time. We have a Bundesliga match at 2:45 Eastern time. We have a La Liga match at 3 o'clock Eastern. The La Liga match features Barcelona. Unfortunately, because of the ease of ESPN Plus for me and Fox being easier than beIN, the chances are I'll be flipping between the championship match and the Bundesliga match and not catch much of the La Liga match. And that's just kind of the consequence, at least for me, of La Liga staying on beIN.
All right, Kartik, I got to put you on the spot again. So the Bundesliga opening game of the season, Bayern Munich against Hertha Berlin. Which channel is that going to be on?
That first match is on FS2, I believe.
Yes, yeah, you got it right. Which? Okay, so all right, you're in.
I've cheated. I've gone and set my DVR for all these matches. So
it's okay. It's okay. Cheating's okay. It's okay. But that's the thing though too. My point is that it's last season of the Bundesliga on Fox. Go out with a bang. Just opening game of the season, Bayern Munich. Let's go FS1. No, it's on FS2. So. And that's a worrying sign. But actually, well, we'll get more into that in the listener mailbag. But you would think that it would be FS1 for the first game, but I guess they probably have a talking head show that they prefer to focus on. Last but not least, Kartik, in the news segment, Steve Nash, as you mentioned before, wasn't on this week's coverage of the Uefa Super Cup, and it's been reported that he's no longer going to be featured as a permanent analyst during TNT's coverage of the Champions League. Instead, he's going to be featured in live and taped appearances throughout the season. The content packages will range from him interacting with a variety of special guests outside the studio setting, as well as BR football analysts. So he's going to be splitting his time working with TNT on some tape segments and maybe some live segments, but also doing a lot of the NBA on TNT. So it looks like when we do see him, it might be similar to what we've seen this past season, where it's replicating different goals. Him and Stu Holden trying to, on the practice pitch, trying to see if they can recreate some of these goals, or maybe it's interviews with some basketball players. But an interesting move there, and I know there's still a lot of people that really despise him and do not like his soccer analysis. I thought he was okay. I didn't think it was that bad, but whether this is his personal decision or if this is something that TNT offered him and said, hey, would you be interested in doing this instead? He's taken it. All right, moving on to TV ratings. Again, we're not going to go into all of these because we will have all of them reported at worldsoccertalk.com in the next 24 to 48 hours. But and we still don't even have all the final numbers too, because the numbers are still coming in. But the Man United, Chelsea, Christian Pulisic lovefest on NBCSN on Sunday from 11:30 a.m. Eastern to 1:30 Eastern. 952,000 viewers on NBCSN on this one. And according to Tunity Analytics, the out-of-home viewership for this game, so people watching this game in bars and pubs and restaurants and gyms, was over 660,000 people. So Put those two together, you're close to 1.6 million people, and that does not include the Telemundo numbers. So if I had a guess on that one, I think Telemundo numbers probably about 200,000, maybe 300,000. So now you're hitting, the 1.8, close to 1.9 million viewers for this game. So big viewership numbers. And yes, there was interest in Christian Pulisic, but let's not overdo it. And then some of the other numbers that come through, I won't go through all of them, but the most eye-opening one to me, Kartik, was that more people watched the Bournemouth against Sheffield United game on NBCSN than Sunday night's DC United LA Galaxy and LAFC New York Red Bulls MLS games combined. And
actually, I've got even a better number for you
on
that. More people watched the Premier League show in between the Newcastle Arsenal match and the Manchester United Chelsea match than those MLS matches combined, or Bournemouth Sheffield United. So having Arsenal, United, and Chelsea kind of back to back allowed the Bridge NBC show, if you go and look at the cable ratings for the weekend, to record over 400,000 viewers, which was pretty remarkable.
Right, stunning, yeah. And to me, the bigger picture is that people are interested in watching the Premier League. Yes, of course. Man United, Chelsea. Yes, people are tuned into that one even more so. More attention on that one. But even a Bournemouth against Sheffield United. Bournemouth's a great team. That was actually my pick of the week last week to watch. And Sheffield United recently promoted, an exciting team. People will watch that game even if it's clubs they don't support. They're watching the whole because there's meaning and there's relevancy to those games, even though it's the first game of the season. And again, Kartik, too, we go back to the same topic and the same thing with Major League Soccer, just trying to cram down our throats the whole New York, LA, trying to make that happen. And it's because those are the two biggest two biggest TV markets in the US. New York is number one, LA is number two. So they're trying to make those LA teams and those New York teams, trying to make those into, hoping that those two biggest TV markets will tune into those games. And they're not. The viewership on those games was 158,000 people for DC against LA Galaxy. Zlatan. And then you had LAFC, an attacking great team, against New York Red Bulls, 153,000 viewers. So it's warning signs in many ways. This is something that we're not surprised by any means. This has been happening for years now, but something has to change. And
we say consistently, Chris, when they put Seattle or Portland, now Atlanta, on, they're getting, the numbers aren't great. They're still not very good, but they're better than when they put the New York or LA teams on. And there somehow is a reluctance, because MLS, remember, is a league run by lawyers and PR professionals based in New York. Okay, so there's a reluctance to really, even though they promote it in their own way, embrace the fact that Atlanta and Seattle, which are different types of places than New York, different type of crowd also, are driving the train, right? I think there's a little bit of cognitive dissonance when you talk to people around MLS about this, because they've always thought in their mind from 1996 onward that LA and New York had to be your two pillars, and it was upset very early on by DC United being the flagship team, and then as we moved into they resisted putting a team in Seattle forever, even though that was one of the most natural soccer markets in the country coming out of the 1970s and 1980s, and always had this different element to it, where soccer, even at the lower division level, was wildly popular. Even college soccer was well supported in the Pacific Northwest. And there's still a reluctance, I think, at MLS HQ and among those who advise MLS on the media side to actually just embrace the I don't know if you want to call it the counterculture or that Seattle and Portland represent, and the different demographic of fan that Atlanta United represents, the kind of unifying rainbow of colors and background fans that they've attracted to their matches. There's still this we need to get, the big American sports fan who is, in the big city type crowd, when I think they'd be much better advised to just take a look at what Atlanta United has done and follow that to a T from a demographic standpoint and promoting that club.
Yeah, and I think in many ways too, they're driving this based on advertisers. So they're in New York. They've got, I'm sure, they're meeting with a lot of these big brands and these big media buyers, and they're they're talking about, okay, New York's such a big market. We got this big product. We need to release it. We need to announce it. And MLS says, yeah, we got these two teams in New York area. This will be a great fit. We'll have a game against LA and have some of the big brands from LA kind of on the West Coast. This will be a great synergy. And they're thinking business and dollars and not thinking about soccer culture and what's on the pitch. Because you go to New York Red Bulls, they don't even play in New York. You go to NYCFC, they play in a baseball stadium. There's not a lot of good things to come out of that. I mean, for the just not even a diehard, but for the casual soccer fan, most casual soccer fans will look at that and go, yeah, that's not authentic soccer. That's kind of, it seems very corporate. All right, let's move on to listener mailbag. First up is Tim Keane. Tim says, the new 2-hour show on Sunday morning was a disappointment. Living on the West Coast, I was able to record it, which was a huge advantage. Spent far too much time on the Big Six, as always, with a little focus on the other games played, even though it was billed as a review of the previous day's play. A ton of long commercial breaks, repeats of interviews we saw on Saturday, Pulisic feature, which was far too long, and appeared to be trying to find stuff to talk about. Where was Neil Ashton? I did like when they had the Sky piece with the special one. Well, Neil Ashton does the Sunday supplement on Sky Sports on Sunday mornings, where he sits down with usually John Cross and a couple of reporters or journalists and talks about some of the main talking points on Sunday and goes into a lot of detail. So Neil's not available on Sunday mornings, but some good points there from Tim.
Yeah, and actually that show I highly recommend it. You can podcast it on Apple Podcasts or on wherever you get podcasts, and you can watch it on YouTube. So that's a Sunday supplement with Neil Ashton. It would be great if, with the synergy with Sky, if they were able to incorporate maybe even a 15-minute segment like that into this NBC program. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, let's go over to Sky Sports and simulcast that for a period of time. Yeah, that's a great idea. Charles Bobbies says, have you noticed that at least since last Friday's Liverpool-Norwich season opener, the ESPN FC show no longer shows match footage as part of commentary on EPL games, nor can I find any such footage on the ESPN app or the YouTube channel. I emailed ESPN Plus asking about this, but they have not replied. If this lack of footage continues, the ESPN Plus subscription seems less attractive to me, as I'm primarily interested in analysis of EPL matches. And good point there, Kartik. Has it returned at all?
No. I mean, the footage hasn't returned on the app or on ESPN FC. Although I have to say, again, I mean, they spend an incredible amount of time analyzing these matches. There is an assumption now, I think, that Dan Thomas and his crew have to make that you've seen the match and you've seen the highlights. Mm-hmm. This is the new television cycle, a rights cycle for global audiences for the Premier League. I don't know if that has something to do with it, with NBC pulling back the bumper rights. I had mentioned, I think, several times previously on this show and on Twitter and in terms of written articles also, that you could get highlights almost more quickly on ESPN's app than you could on anything NBC was producing. So that might have...
Kartik, it's your fault.
What?
It's your fault. You did it.
I hope the NBC didn't notice that, because as they're trying to push you to watch goal, to buy gold, right? Yeah. They're trying to push you, especially towards that premium gold package, that more expensive gold package. They are... in the process, I think, of trying to limit distribution of Premier League clips outside of their purview. So I could see that. There's also the they've also, I should mention this because we had this conversation when we were at ESPN Plus a year ago about the golf the golf content that went to ESPN Plus. NBC, who was the rights holder, pulled that back as well. So I think they may be seeing ESPN Plus in a macro sense as more of a threat to them on the digital side than what ESPN was doing before, so they pulled all that back.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head there, Kartik. And it's one of those things, the way it works is that ESPN would have to reach out to NBCSN and say, hey, we're interested in including highlights of some of the goals in our daily show. This is going to help increase the visibility and awareness of the Premier League. Do we have your permission to do that? And usually when they did show it last season, they would have at the top, courtesy of NBCSN or courtesy of NBC Sports. That isn't the case this season, and you're absolutely right. I'm sure it has to do with NBC Sports Gold, trying to push people to sign up there. The other thing I would recommend to the listener and to others, to Charles, is check out the NBC Sports YouTube channel, and oftentimes they have some of the highlights, or they have done in the past highlights there, so maybe that's a place that they may put them instead. It might be that they're trying to push the YouTube channel more. Next up is Mark Doherty, and he says, I'm not sure if I want to ask for fear of this going away, which is similar to what we just discussed a minute ago, but sometimes it's better not to talk about these sort of things, but it's important to get it out there. But Mark says, Premier League replays are available for games on cable for Telemundo and Universo. I have been able to pick up Man United against Chelsea from the 55th minute on the app, going to try to watch Spurs against Villa. I don't understand a lick of Spanish, but good to watch. Is this a glitch or legit? So it is legit. So we know that any games that are televised on the English language, NBCSN or NBC, are not available on the NBC Sports app until NBC Sports Gold app until 9 p.m. Eastern time. There's an embargo, so they're trying to get you to watch those games live. And if you do miss them live and you didn't DVR them, the only way you can watch those replays is at 9 p.m. Eastern or later through the NBC Sports Gold app, which you have to pay for. But Telemundo, who has the Spanish language rights, and their sister channel Universo, who has the rights too for some of these games, you can watch those games on replay. So they're making those games available a lot faster and a lot more availability through their online apps. So that's something to definitely consider if you don't mind watching it or listening it in Spanish. Rico Richardson says, I think ESPN needs to produce a show similar to NFL Live or what Fox Soccer did back in the day, which was every day, highlights and news type show which recapped everything that should complement the soccer coverage they already have. Well, they have that show, which is ESPN FC, and it's on ESPN Plus. I never watched NFL Live, so I don't know if maybe it goes into a deeper dive or does something different, but it is available though.
Yeah, and certainly ESPN FC has a lot of analysis, and they've been forced, as these broadcasters have denied them highlights. Now, we just talked about NBC with the Premier League, even though ESPN FC, this is the 7th season of ESPN FC. ESPN FC show, ironically, launched right as NBC was beginning its run as the Premier League rights holder. They've always had Premier League highlights, but they've had to really go deeper into the analysis because they haven't they've had a hard time getting La Liga highlights from beIN. beIN has been very stingy about that historically, and they weren't able to get World Cup highlights from Fox or from FIFA. However, they would go about that. So they've had to get deeper in their analysis. They still obviously Obviously, they show all the Serie A and MLS highlights because they're the rights holders, and they do have the Bundesliga highlights from Fox. So you do get those highlights. You get Liga MX highlights as well that come from whoever the rights holder is for that particular team or that particular match. But they've had to go deeper into the analysis because of losing other highlights.
Next up is Craig Shapiro. Craig says, Fox Sports is broadcasting 6 Bundesliga matches this weekend, 4 of them on FS1. Does anyone know? There has been no promotion again. Guess they're trying to answer the timeless, if a tree falls in the woods with no one to hear, does it make a sound? And same here, Kartik. I don't think I've seen a single promo. I haven't seen a press release, other than for the German Super Cup. They did release a press release, I think, the day before. What Fox usually does is the day before the season starts, there's a press release that goes out. So that would be today, Thursday. That's the other thing we didn't talk about in the news about La Liga and beIN Sports is now we know that Fox is completely out of the foreign club soccer business. I mean, they're losing the Bundesliga to ESPN Plus. They've lost the opportunity to renew the deal, to get a deal for La Liga. The only hope that they have is maybe that a game a week or maybe 2 games a week are sub-licensed to them for a fee. But I'm not sure if they'd be interested in it, though. I mean, yes, the Bundesliga, timing-wise, would work out well. I mean, Bundesliga ending, okay, how do we fill those time slots? Do we use La Liga and have sub-license a game or 2 and then just basically go ahead and use that as a vehicle to promote our coverage of, the Men's World Cup or the Women's World Cup or Major League Soccer? That's a possibility, but if they don't get any sub-licensing deals, they're completely out of club soccer other than Major League Soccer.
Yeah, the only thing I can think of also is maybe they get the Friday matches of La Liga sub-licensed from beIN because that fills the time slot with what they had in terms of the Bundesliga. But the weekend is more problematic for them because La Liga start times tend to be later in many cases than Premier League or Bundesliga start times, so they don't fit nicely into the Fox calendar with all the college sports they show and auto racing, etc. In addition to the fact that they've already the 12:30 Eastern time Bundesliga start on Saturdays, that match is consistently being bumped. If it's not put on Big Fox, which it rarely is, then it's getting bumped to FS2 or even in some cases to Fox Soccer Plus. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because of conflicts.
Exactly. Good point. Yeah. And last but not least, next up is Alex with a comment. And this is really, really very insightful. And Alex says, I wanted to chime in on the new NBC streaming replay times. I don't know anything about how in England soccer fans get football games over there, but I wonder if NBC had to set those times up like that because of maybe it's cheaper to get the Premier League pass if you're based in the UK and you use a VPN compared to what someone might have to pay in a package to watch league games in England, and the league was trying to cut that off so they don't have a loss of revenue. Thanks for the podcast. And that's quite possible too, because I know from first-hand experience in terms of not actually doing it, but talking to people where in terms of piracy in the UK, where a lot of soccer fans were using VPNs or using American credit cards in England to actually go ahead and subscribe to some of the streaming or watch it illegally and watch the games illegally. Maybe this makes it more difficult because most of the games in the Premier League in England are not on television. There's a blackout for the 10 a.m. Eastern Time games. None of those games are shown. You have the early kickoff on a Saturday. You have the late kickoff on a Saturday. And you've got maybe one game on a Sunday, and this could have been something where the Premier League was pushing it, saying like, hey, let's embargo these games. I think it's more to do with the NBC Sports Gold app, where they're trying to make that a thing and trying to continue to push that. And as we saw from this past weekend too, I mean, Rebecca Lowe was selling that thing throughout the entire weekend. And if you look at the headlines and look at what Rebecca says, it sounds wonderful. You have access to all the games. But once you go into the details and figure out what was had before and what you get now and kind of the restrictions, then it becomes less appealing. But definitely, Alex could be right. Some good comments there. Some good insight. If you have good insights or good comments or want to rant and rave against us or think we're nuts or want to say anything positive, whatever it may be, or have any questions about streaming or watching games on television, or it could be any leagues from around the world, we are here to help serve you. You can always reach us via email through web@worldsoccertalk.com, as well as facebook.com/worldsoccertalk, and on Twitter @worldsoccertalk. Plus, of course, you can always post your comments on worldsoccertalk.com. And Kartik, as one of the key people involved behind the scenes, doing commentating and doing analysis and interviews for the Miami FC national champions, and also as far as your analysis and thoughts on everything from Florida history to politics and much, much more. When they're not listening to you on the podcast and they're not reading your articles on worldsoccertalk.com, where can they find you?
You can find me at Twitter at KKFLA737. Thank you for that flattering lead up, Chris. But yeah, I'm pretty active in a number of places. So KKFLA737 is the place to find me on Twitter.
You're welcome. Very, very well deserved. You do a lot of good work for soccer in this country. So listeners, thank you for listening. You can get a new episode of the World Soccer Talk podcast every Thursday. Every episode is released on SoundCloud, Spotify, Pandora, YouTube, Stitcher, iTunes, TuneIn, Audioboom, Overcast, and worldsoccertalk.com. Pretty much everywhere where good podcasts are found. If you like the show, share it with your friends on social media and give us a review on iTunes. And heading into another weekend of World Soccer with the Bundesliga kicking off, with LaLiga kicking off, with the Christian Pulisic lovefest continuing on Sunday perhaps. We'll have to wait and see on that. What should they do?
Enjoy your football.